This week's parsha is Parshas Lech Lecha. And rather than getting into the intricacies of the story, I'd like to speak about one very, very important point, which really runs through this parsha, next week's parsha, which is a statement of Chazal, in Pirkei Avos. The Chazal say that Ba'asara Nisyonos Nisnas Avram Avinu. Avram Avinu was tested with 10 trials. He was given 10 big tests in his lifetime. The first one, according to the Rambam's count, was Lech Lecha, the beginning of this week's parasha, Lech Lecha, that God told him to pick himself up and abandon his birthplace and his native land and his father's house and move to Eretz Yisrael, which of course is a very big nisayon, a very big test. And of course, the last of the nisyonos, the greatest of the nisyonos, was the Akedah, that he was called upon to sacrifice his own son. And there were 8 others in between. And this teaches us the love that Avraham Avinu had for the Ribono Shel Olam, and that, in turn, the Ribono Shel Olam's love for him was more than justified. And the question is, what is the idea of nisayon? The idea of nisayon implies a test. A test. A test, in turn, implies a certain uncertainty. You don't know what the result is going to be. When you go for your driver's test, you don't know, are you going to pass or are you going to fail? So when a human being gives a test, that in fact is the case. Neither the tester or the one being tested knows what the outcome will be with a certainty. I mean, you might have a guess, an intuition that you'll probably pass. Maybe the tester also has an intuition, but it certainly isn't knowledge. Certainly the possibility exists that there'll be a failure. But for the Ribono Shel Olam to give a test seems a little absurd. The Ribono Shel Olam knows exactly what you're going to do. He knows what you can do. He knows what you will do. He knows the future. So in what sense can something which HaKadosh Baruch Hu administers be called a test, be called a nisayon? This is a question which the Ramban deals with, not in this week's parsha, but next week's parsha. Because the only one of the 10 which is explicitly called a nisayon is the 10th. The introduction to the story of the Akedah says, Achar hadvarim ha'ela, after these events, v'ha'elokim nisas Avraham, God tested Avraham. So that's the one place where the word nisayon is explicitly. Chazal say that there were 9 that came before, but here the Torah uses the word itself. So here the Ramban raises the question, what does it mean that God gives a test? So the Ramban says that the applicability of the word test is only from the perspective of the human being being tested. You're right, from the perspective of God, it's not a test at all. God knows exactly what you're going to do. He knows the future. But to the extent that man has free will, and from his vantage point, from his perspective, there is an uncertainty, so the word test is applicable. That's what the Ramban says. And of course, this raises the age-old question of free will versus divine foreknowledge. How do you reconcile the two? And of course, that's the unanswerable question, the question that has been asked in thousands of dormitory conversations. And we'll never have an answer to that question. But the Ramban just points out that from God's perspective, it's not a test at all. God knows exactly what Avram was going to do, but from Avram's perspective, it was a test because he didn't know what the outcome would be. But since the Torah uses the word nisayon, this gives the Ramban an opportunity to expand the concept of nisayon and discuss it at length. And Chumash he discusses it somewhat at length, but in another one of his works called the Shar HaGemul, he talks about it at even greater length, and there he really deals with the problem in the following way. As we know, there's a concept of Yisurin, there's a concept of suffering. People experience suffering in life. And the Gemara says in Masechah Shabbos, Ein Yisurin B'loi Chet, that all suffering is a consequence of sin. That's what the Gemara seems to say. All suffering is a consequence of sin. And The Ramban takes that very literally. He doesn't allow for many exceptions. Chazal often say that ein l'neidim in aklalos. You can't learn from generalities. In other words, whenever Chazal express something as a general principle, there could be many, many exceptions. So with this rule that all suffering is associated with sin could have a number of exceptions, but the Ramban is fairly conservative. He allows for very few exceptions. For example, there is a phenomenon which the Gemara discusses, which is called Yisurin Shel Ahava. That God afflicts a person out of love. So what does that mean, Yisurin Shel Ahava? It's a verse. Kis asher ye'ahav Hashem yochiach. God chastises the one he loves. So what does this mean, Yisurin Shel Ahava? So Rashi in Maseches Bracha says the concept of Yisurin Shel Ahava means that sometimes the Kadosh Baruch Hu will give a person suffering in order to increase his reward in the next world. That somehow, by subjecting him to the difficulty of suffering, his reward is increased in the next world. And the Ramban rejects the concept. The Ramban says, no, that can't be the meaning of Yisurin Shel Ahava. It can't mean that God gives you suffering simply to increase your reward, because the Gemara says the Yisurin always involves sin. So what then is the concept of Yisurin Shel Ahava? So the Ramban says a very surprising thing. And the Gemara says that sometimes even after a person does tshuva, tshuva alone is not enough to complete the atonement. Sometimes a person needs suffering in addition to complete the atonement. The Gemara in Yuma says that if a person violated a very severe sin, something which is a chi of misas bez, and something which is a capital offense, so even after the person did tshuva, the person needs suffering to complete the cleansing process. So the Ramban says that suffering is called Yisurin Shel Ahava. It's called suffering of love. Meaning God already loves you. You've already done tshuva. So therefore God loves you. So why is he sending the suffering? Because even after tshuva, it's necessary to have this extra suffering to complete the kapara. So therefore, even Yisurin Shel Ahava, the Ramban says, is related to sin. But the Ramban, again, as I said, is very conservative. He takes the Gemara fairly literally. And he says that, as a rule, we should assume that all suffering is related to sin in some way. But then he raises an objection. He says, but we know there is something called nisayon. There's something which is called testing. And this seems to be an exception to the rule, because here we see in the concept of nisayon, a person is given a challenge. The challenge often entails suffering. And the purpose of the suffering is to serve as a test, not to punish the person. So how do you understand that? That seems to be a contradiction to our axiom that all suffering is related to sin. So the Ramban concedes, yes, this is an exception. The idea of nisayon is an exception. But he very, very carefully circumscribes the parameters of nisayon. He says that nisayon is not as common, not as ubiquitous a phenomenon as you would think. It only is administered in very, very, very limited circumstances. And the Ramban cites a medrash. It happens to be a medrash in Parshas Vayei, right next week's Parsha, which brings a verse which says, Hashem tzadik yivchan, that God tests the tzaddikim. And the medrash gives a mashal. But let's say you have a person who sells pottery, and he wants to demonstrate how strong his pots are. So he takes a stick and he bangs the pots. And you see, the pot can withstand the blow. You see that it's a solid piece. So says the Medrash, which pots does he hit with the stick? The ones that he knows can take it. And the ones that are fragile and will break, those he doesn't hit. So therefore it says the Medrash, likewise, Hashem Tzadik Yivchan. God only sends the idea of test, of nisayon, to those that he knows will pass. That's what Ramban says. If you're not going to pass, God will not give you a nisayon. That's what Ramban says. So success is guaranteed. If you're getting a nisayon, then you know you're going to pass. It's inconceivable. God only gives it to the people who will pass. Why does he give it? So says the Ramban, he gives it out of kindness. Because since God knows you're going to pass, you're going to be richly rewarded for it. God knows that you would have passed, so I put you through the ringer. Says the Ramban, there's a big difference between the reward of a person who's well-intentioned and the person who does good deeds. So it's worthwhile to give you the nisayon, which you will certainly be successful in meeting. This way you can be rewarded not as a person who merely has a good heart, but as a person who has done good deeds. And that is worthwhile, even though the nisayon, as you're going through it, is difficult. So the Ramban says that Hashem Tzadik Yivchad, the nisayon is given only to the person who will certainly pass, and therefore it is not vindictive, it isn't a punishment, it isn't hurtful in any way. It always has a happy ending. It always results in the person being richly rewarded, because Hashem only gives it to the people that will pass the test. That's what Ramban says.
Will pass or can pass?
That will pass the test. Will pass the test.
What's a pass? 50%, 55%?
No, passing is 100%. Passing. So therefore the Ramban says essentially that the concept of nisayon is really not part of our experience at all. Because it really is given only to the great tzaddikim who will certainly pass, and it's given to increase their reward, but otherwise it's not part of our experience. Now the problem with the Ramban, what is left unexplained, is really this, that what about the challenges that we seem to face in life? As we live our lives, we all intuit that we have challenges. We have a Yetzer Hara, we have certain personality traits that make it difficult for us to do the right thing. Maybe a bit lazy, maybe we are a bit lustful, maybe we are a bit selfish, etc., etc., etc. And these personality traits create a challenge. Will we rise to do the right thing, or will we be held back by our faults? Sometimes there are circumstances that make things difficult. Sometimes it could be poverty. We don't have the money to afford spending a lot for a mitzvah. Sometimes even to perform a mitzvah in the most bare bones way will compel us to overextend ourselves. These are challenges. These are challenges. Sometimes we succeed, sometimes we fail. So we're going to say these don't fall under the category of nisayon. Right? According to the Ramban, this would not be called nisayon, because a nisayon is only given to the person who will certainly pass. Well, what about the difficulties that we face, where sometimes we succeed and sometimes we fail? So that is not nisayon. Well, if it's not nisayon, what then is it? So this is something that troubled me for a long time, and I began to look around in various svarim, and I finally found one sefer that addressed this point. It's called the Sefer Torah Avram. It was from the Slobodka Mashkiach, Vodom Kuzinski, Zecher Tzadik Levracha, Hashem Yinkom Dama, who was killed in the Holocaust. And he wrote a series of essays to address this point. And he raises something which is very, very, very interesting. He says the following. He says, we often mistakenly believe that something which is hard for us to do is a nisayon. We apply the term nisayon, we apply the word test to the things that are difficult for us to do. There's a popular book that was written called Life is a Test. But life is a test. Everything in life is a test. Now, the truth is, it has a pedigree. Right? The Mesilas Yesharim, in fact, does write that. The Mesilas Yesharim writes that all the matters of this world are a test. Everything in this world is a test. There are nice cars to be driven. There are nice clothes to be had. There are good meals to be eaten. These are all tests. These are all tests. I mean, not if you have the money. But if you don't have the money, these are serious tests. So it's true that the word nisayon, when it's used loosely, can apply to the daily challenges we all face. But when the Ramban uses the word nisayon, he's using it in a very technical, very limited sense. And by his definition, the daily challenges we face, he would not call nisayon. And the Torah Avram essentially says that there are three different types of challenges that we face in life. First is the temptation for things that we have brought upon ourselves. There are certain things for which we do not have a natural desire, but we have conditioned ourselves to partake of, to enjoy. And sometimes the pleasure is illicit, and now we've turned it into a test. So, for example, let's talk about smoking. Right? There is no natural desire to smoke. If you've never smoked, you will not find yourself compelled to smoke. There may be a psychological desire if you see that the cool people are smoking, if you see that the glamorous people are smoking. It might be a form of adolescent rebellion against the authority of your parents. I mean, there are all kinds of reasons why a person might take the smoke the first time. But there is no physical lust for smoking if you've never had a cigarette. There may be a gene which gives a person a tendency towards addiction once the person has tried it, or once the person has tried it several times. That's possible. But if the person has never smoked, there is no physical yen for nicotine. But let's say the person has fallen into the trap, and he's tried it. You know how the joke goes. They say, "Why don't you make a bracha on a cigarette?" And smoking a cigarette. So they say like this. There's two answers. The first answer is because the first cigarette is always smoked in the bathroom, so you can't say a bracha there. And the second answer, which is given, is that the first cigarette is always stolen, so you can't say a bracha on something that you stole. So the person has stolen the cigarette. He smoked it in the bathroom, and one leads to the next, and slowly he's gotten hooked. Now he has an addiction to a suicidal habit. I think it's safe to say that smoking is not only a bad habit, it's not only dangerous, but it's sinful as well. Suicide is a sin. So we can say that smoking is also sinful. So the question is, now he has to stop. He has to stop. It's not very hard to continue smoking. It's difficult. Now it's difficult. So is this a nisayon? Well, it's a test of sorts, but he brought it on himself. He brought it on himself. And that the Ramban is not discussing. A nisayon that you bring upon yourself, yes, it's difficult. No one said that it's easy to stop. But that is not a nisayon which God sends your way. That is a nisayon of your own creation. And therefore, the Ramban is not discussing that. Nisyonos that we bring upon ourselves, that doesn't fall into the category of nisayon. There's a famous letter from Yisrael Salanter who says a tremendous chidush regarding such trials that we bring upon ourselves. Now the Gemara says that lefum tzara agra, that the reward for a mitzvah is commensurate with the effort. If it's difficult, then there's more reward. So Rabbi Eliezer writes, however, that does not apply where you brought the nisayon, you brought the test upon yourself, where the difficulty is of your own creation. If you made it difficult for yourself, then there's no extra reward for doing the right thing. Now that would be tantamount to crime paying. In other words, you've committed the sin repeatedly, you've made it difficult to stop, and now by stopping you think you're going to get extra reward because it's become difficult. So essentially crime has paid. You've benefited from having done the sin repeatedly, because thereby you made it more difficult to stop, and therefore you're going to get more reward because the reward is commensurate with the effort. That doesn't seem just. It doesn't seem that you should be rewarded for having brought this upon yourself. Yes?
If you're going to shul, picking up what you said, and you can go over a mountain, or you can go along the bottom to get to the same location. It's much harder to go over the mountain to do the mitzvah of going to shul. As that, do you get extra reward by making it
more
difficult?
That's what Rabbi Eliezer certainly says. He says that if you could go the easy way and you go the more difficult way, you're certainly not going to get more reward for that. But he's saying more than that. He's saying, let's say you are choosing a house. The question is, where should you live? And both houses are equal. There's no reason to take one over the other. They're both the same price and both equally comfortable, and so on and so forth. And you choose the one farther away, thinking that this way I'll get more schar for going to shul. And now you live farther away from shul. It doesn't work that way. So why did you buy this house? Who told you to buy this house? For what? or to make your life more difficult. By the way, these cheshbonos, these calculations often don't work. When I lived in San Diego, it was very interesting that the housing stock in the vicinity of the shul was fairly inferior. So people used to buy houses that were somewhat farther away. And then they would delude themselves into thinking, no, it's no problem, a mile. I can walk back and forth a mile 5 times on Shabbos, Friday night and back and forth and back for a program on Shabbos day. And then after a few weeks, it begins to get to them, and they realize that maybe once back and forth is about as much as they can do. But Friday night is too hard, and Mincha and Shalosh Shudas is too hard, and Shabbos morning they would show up. So you have to be honest and avoid self-delusion on this. But certainly to make it harder for yourself, it doesn't work that way. So this is the first category. Difficulties that you bring upon yourself. That's not a challenge which God sends your way. And very, very often in life, the Gemara tells us, brings a verse in Mishlei which says, "Ivelas Adam Tesalef Darko," a person's foolishness corrupts his own way, Val Hashem Yizaf Libo, and he's angry at God. Right? Then why did you send this challenge my way? What do you mean, why did you send this challenge my way? You brought it upon yourself. A challenge you bring upon yourself is not a challenge which God sends. Then, he says, the second level is a challenge which, in a sense, God sends because it is rooted in your particular temperament, your nature. Something about you, in your personality, makes this a difficult thing to do or to avoid doing. So here, I think we would say, yes, that if you overcome the difficulty, yes, l'fum sara agra, you'll be deserving of more reward because you overcame the difficulty. But this, says the Torah Savram, is also not what the Ramban is speaking about. Because this is not the unusual test. This is to be expected in life. Life was not meant to be easy. Life was not meant to be easy. Adam la'omo yulad. People were made to work. Life was not meant to be easy to the extent that whenever there's the slightest difficulty, you have to ask yourself, why is that? Now let's understand, this is a very deep thing. Let me raise the following illustration. We know that a human being has to breathe a number of times every minute. Do you ever ask yourself the question, why should that be? Why did God subject us to this difficulty of having to breathe several times a minute? Is that fair? Couldn't have God made our lives easier that we shouldn't have to breathe? Or why do we have to eat 3 times a day or several times a day? What for? Couldn't God have made us in such a way that we wouldn't have to eat? Every so often we get hungry and we got to find something to eat and maybe even prepare something, and that's difficult. God could have made our lives much easier. No one would consider that suffering. In other words, the regular inconveniences of life, that you have to breathe, you have to eat, that you have to find a place to park, all those things, that is not called suffering. It's possible to imagine a life that would have been easier, that you'd not have to breathe and not have to eat, and you'd never have to find a place to park. Of course, with your imagination, you can imagine a life which is easier. But a certain amount of inconvenience and difficulty is to be expected. That is the nature of life. That is not called suffering. That is not called suffering.
Why is that the nature of life?
Pardon? Why? Why did God make you with 2 eyes and not 3, and 2 hands and not 4? He had a cheshbon. He had a reason why he made you the way he made you, and therefore the fact that you have to breathe, eat, park, right? This is part of your makeup. Now I'll illustrate this point. The Ramban himself discusses this. He brings the Gemara in Maseches Erechim. The Gemara in Erechim says, what is the smallest amount of inconvenience that could be considered suffering? Like what is like the smallest conceivable inconvenience that is called Yisurin, it's called suffering. So the Gemara is like this. A person sticks his hand in his pocket to take out 2 coins. And he pulls his hand out and only 1 coin comes up, which necessitates putting his hand in his pocket a second time. That's an inconvenience. That's the smallest amount of suffering. That's called suffering already. So the Gemara says, so what is the nafkamina? What is the consequence of calling this suffering? It says, because if a person goes through a day without one of these inconveniences, then kiber olamo, he knows that he has lost his share in the world to come. He's being paid in this world. He's being paid in this world for his mitzvahs. He's going to get zapped in the next world because he's receiving the reward in this world that he isn't even suffering these inconveniences. So the Ramban asks a question. The Ramban says, wait a minute, how do you know that he's a Rosh? And the reason he has this carefree life is because he's being paid in this world for his few mitzvahs. Maybe the opposite. Maybe he's a tzaddik gomor. Maybe he's 1,000% righteous. And that's why he doesn't have to put his hand in the second time. So the Ramban says no. The Ramban says because these types of inconveniences, even the tzaddik gomer experiences. If you are a perfect tzaddik, absolutely perfect, these type of inconveniences you would experience. Having to stick your hand in your pocket a second time. Why? Because that is not a punishment. That is just the way life is. We're not talking about illness. We're not talking about poverty. We're just talking about the inconveniences of life, that sometimes you put your hand in your pocket and the right exact change doesn't come out. Even a tzaddik gomer will experience that. But when Hashem wants to punish the Rasha, so then HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives him schar in this world which is beyond the ordinary, in order that you should have undiluted suffering in the next world. So therefore that's possible. It's possible that kibul olamo, it's possible that he's receiving his bliss in this world in a supernatural, miraculous way, and that's why he always gets exact change every time. Meaning like this, let's say I was a tzaddik gomer, right? So when I open the book, why does it always open to the right page? Why is it that I have to flip the pages to find the place I'm looking for? If I was really a tzaddik gomer, it should always happen. I open the book and book, there it is, the page I need. No, says the Ramban. Right? You open a book and it doesn't open to the right page. That's not a punishment. You're not being punished for that. That's just the way life is. Life is, you open the book, it doesn't open itself to the right page. But what if it happens? What if you see that every time you open a book, it just opens to the right page? It's time to start worrying. That's what the Ramban says. Because now, you have to worry, maybe everything's going your way. That's a sign that God is paying you off in this world, and who knows what's waiting for you in the next world. But if you're an absolute tzaddik gomer, these are the inconveniences of life. Now again, I don't know how this applies to some of the inconveniences. Again, parking, as the example we give. The fact you have to look for a place is one thing, but sometimes, you drive around, looking. Is that, maybe that is a punishment. I don't know the answer to that question, but this is the idea what the Ramban says.
There's certain every things, time you park, there's a space.
Yeah. There are certain things that are part of life itself. So the Torah Ram says people were not put on this world to have an easy time. People were put on this world to work. So the fact that some things are difficult to do, that's also not an isag. It's also not a test that God sends your way. And therefore every life has challenges that are difficult. That are difficult because of our natures. If we're a touch lustful, or a bit lazy, or maybe a bit selfish, then there are many things that will be challenges for us. Right? That's not a nisayon. That's not a challenge which God sends our way. And therefore, in this garden variety of test, of difficulty, sometimes we will succeed, and sometimes we will fail. Right? That's not what the Ramban is speaking about. The Ramban is speaking about a third category. And he defines it this way. I'll add another detail to the definition, I think. But he defines it this way. This is something which is a challenge not because of your particular nature. This is a challenge because what you are called upon to do defies human nature generally. This is something that would be difficult for a human being to do as a human being. It's not difficult because of some quirk in your temperament. This is something which is difficult because it goes counter to the fundamental nature of a human being as a human being. Says the Torah Savram, the Akedah was such a thing. For a father to slaughter his child was not difficult because of some unique aspect of Avram's personality. This is something which goes contrary to human nature. The essential nature of a human being, which is to love his own children, makes it virtually impossible to do such a thing. That is a nisayon. That's a challenge. When God calls upon us to do something which is contrary to human nature, that's a nisayon. Now, the Torah Savram illustrates this with a fantastic application of a Rambam. Because we know the halacha is there are certain situations where a person is called upon to give up his life, where the halacha demands that a Jew give up his life. A Jew is obligated to give up his life rather than to commit idolatry. Avodah Zarah is yehareg val yavor. A Jew has to give up his life rather than commit idolatry. So let's say a fellow holds a gun to my head and says, commit idolatry, but onto that idol or else I'll kill you. The halacha is that I am obligated to say, kill me. I must give up my life rather than commit idolatry. Now, what is the halacha if I succumb to the temptation? I can't rise to the challenge and I commit idolatry. Now, idolatry is a capital crime. Normally it's punishable with the death penalty. What's the halacha in this case? So the Rambam says that I am not liable for the death penalty. Why? Because this is called ones. This is called something which is beyond the human's ability. When facing the threat of death, it is beyond his capacity to resist. So he's called an ones. It's called something he could not prevent, and therefore he's not liable. And yet, the halacha calls upon him to give up his life. So this seems to be a contradiction in terms. The halacha is comfortable demanding this of him, yet, if he fails, we say he's blameless. Why? Because it's an onus. He couldn't help himself. Well, if he couldn't help himself, how does the halacha demand of him to give up his life? Now the answer is,
he's blameless, or it's not a capital crime?
He's blameless. He's off the hook. The answer is that the definition of ones and non-ones is that a person is only liable for punishment if within human nature it is possible to comply with the demands of the law. If it is superhuman, if it is beyond the ability of a normal human being, then he's off the hook. He's not liable. But the Torah asks us to go beyond human nature. That's a nisayon. That's a nisayon. That is a test. So the Torah of Rome says that nisayon means we are challenged in a way which is beyond human nature. Says the Torah of Rome, that is where the Ramban says that a challenge such as that is only sent to the tzaddik who will certainly pass. Now, I'd like to add two additional elements to this, right, that I think are true about the nisayon. One is that least in many of the nisyonos, many of the tests that Avraham Avinu faced, it wasn't just that they were difficult, but that even after going through the nisayon, there would be residual suffering. Now let me explain. Let's say, for example, running a marathon. Right? Running a marathon, training for a marathon, running for a marathon is very difficult. And yet, if I do it, I am filled with pride and satisfaction that I overcame the challenge, I overcame the difficulties, and I was able to do this very, very difficult thing. Losing a loved one can be a test of faith, but even if I pass the test of faith, I still have the residual pain of having lost a loved one. That's what makes it a nisayon. In other words, the Ramban could say the following, that the fact that God gives you something difficult to do, that's not called suffering. Why? Yes, it's difficult. It's hard to do now. But if you do it, you won't feel pain. You will feel satisfaction and pride that you overcame the challenge. You know, it's not easy to go through med school. Right? A lot of long nights. Studying, cramming, working hard, but at the end of the road, you're proud of yourself. I achieved something great. So that is not what the Ramban is talking about. Because again, the Ramban is talking about how do we reconcile the idea of nisayon and the idea that suffering is always associated with a sin. So the Ramban says the fact that something is difficult as you're doing it isn't a problem. Of course it's difficult as you're doing it. But once you've completed it, you don't feel a sense of pain. When we talk about nisayon, it's not just that it's difficult to do, but even after you successfully traverse the nisayon, there still is pain. There still is suffering. There still is loss. So how can that be? So the Ramban says that's the concept of nisayon, which is an exception. This is one form of suffering which is sent even to the tzaddik, which is not related to sin. There's also another aspect of nisayon, which Hasidic works talk about. And this is a very, very, very interesting thing. This is a thought which is written in many, many Hasidic works, but I'll cite two. The Kol Simcha from Rabbunim Peshischa and the Avodas Yisrael from the Choshen Asher Magid both say the same idea. They say that the idea of a nisayon is not just that it's difficult, but God takes away from you the personality traits that would make it easier. Let's say, for example, God calls upon you to do something very, very difficult. Calls upon Avraham Avinu, Lech Lecha. Pick yourself up from your household, your family, your homeland, and go to an unknown land. That's difficult. Why is it difficult? So we know the famous Rashi. Rashi says that when you travel, b'derech hateva, if things follow their natural course, it leads to poverty, it leads to a diminution of fame. Right? Avraham Avinu already was beginning to suspect an inability to have children. Travel sometimes reduces fertility as well. So therefore, it was going to be very, very, very difficult. All the things that he would have wanted naturally are going to be jeopardized by embarking on this journey. So it's a difficult test. Let's say Avraham Avinu temperamentally was an optimistic person. Let's say he always saw the cloud and the silver lining. So that would make the silver lining in the cloud. Thank you. So let's say by temperament he was an optimistic person. So that would make the nisayon easier. Right? It's true. God is challenging to do something which looks like it's difficult. But, temperamentally you always see the glass as half full. It might be easier for you to do. So let's say God not only calls upon you to do this difficult thing, but he takes away your natural optimism. It makes it harder. What if he takes away your religious clarity? What if, for example, under normal circumstances, you feel a tremendous devekus, a tremendous connection to God, and all of a sudden you're given the challenge, and at the same time you feel an estrangement, you feel a distance, you feel you're davening and you don't feel that you're connecting, you don't feel God is listening, it seems there's no response, you don't feel that give and take, that interaction, you don't feel the bonding. That makes it more difficult. So they say that is the unique aspect of Nisayon. The unique aspect of Nisayon is that not only does God call upon you to do something difficult, but He takes away the tools, He takes away the kalim that would help you rise to the challenge. And now you have to do it out of pure yiras Hashem, pure reverence for God. That makes it more difficult. So let me give you the illustrations. The Kashmir Magid is commenting on a Targum Yonasan, a Targum on the Chumash. It says by the Akedah that God called the name of the place Hashem Yir'eh, that God sees. That from this place God saw what I had done. And the Targum inexplicably adds words to the translation. It says that God sees and is not seen. The Targum adds those words. This is the place that God sees, but He is not seen. And at first glance, it's inexplicable. Like, what is the Targum adding by making this point? This is the place from which God sees, but on the other hand, He is not seen. So the Kashmir Magid says, this is exactly the point, that if at this time Avram could see God, the test would have been a lot easier. But that was the exact point, that this was a place where God would see, but God was not seen. But Avram Avinu felt a certain distance from the Ribbono Shel Olam at this time, and the normal religious sentiment that would assist him and support him in doing this difficult thing was taken from him. Now the Rabbuno Peshischa brings a medrash which talks about the 10 trials of Avram Avinu, and it says that at the end of the Akedah, God took an oath. Bi nishbati l'Hashem, Hashem, I swear. And the Medrash asks, what is the nature of this oath? What did God swear after the 10th challenge? So the Medrash says like this. The Medrash says that Avram asked God, promise me that you're not going to bring me any more nisyonos. This is it. That this is the... And God said, I swear, this is it. This is the last one, no more. That's the oath. But the Medrash then gives a mashal. At first glance, the mashal shouldn't be necessary. The mashal goes like this. There once was a king who had a wife, and for some odd reason, every time the wife had a baby, he divorced his wife. So when she had her first baby, he divorced her. And then, whatever friends' influence, he married her back. She had a second baby, he divorced her again. Took her back, had a third baby, divorced her again. And this happened the 4th time, 5th time, 6th time, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th. After the 10th time, and she divorced her the 10th time, so they convinced him to take her back, and they said, swear that you're not going to divorce her again. And he swore that he would never divorce her again. And somehow this is a mashal for the 10 tests of Avram. So Rabbuno Peshischa asks a very simple question. If you're looking for an illustration to illustrate the tests, why do you call it a divorce? Like, what is the analogy between a man divorcing his wife and subjecting Avram Avinu to a test? Says Rabbuno Peshischa, because that's exactly what happens in a nisayon. In a nisayon, there is a sense of estrangement, just like in a divorce. There's an estrangement of the husband and wife. In a nisayon, there's an estrangement between God and man. The man is severed. His ties are severed. He is disconnected. He feels distant from God. And that's what makes the Nisayon so difficult. So says Rebunam Peshischa, when Avraham Avinu asked God to swear there wouldn't be more Nisyonos, it wasn't that Avraham didn't want difficulties. Avraham would have been happy to bear difficulties. He didn't want that sense of estrangement from God. He wanted to remain close to God. He didn't want there should be that distance, even momentarily, and that's why he asked God, please, no more challenges. Not because I don't want to do that. Difficult things I'm going to do. Difficult things, I'll do anything for you. But that aspect of Nisayon, which is you take away that religious closeness, that I don't want. Now, I once had an experience that I once received a phone call from a woman, and she told me she was going through a religious crisis, a crisis of faith. She doesn't daven anymore. She doesn't feel close to God anymore. Really, it was a very serious crisis of faith. So I didn't know the woman, just a little bit of background, right? I said, tell me, like, what do you do for a living? So she says, I teach religion in a Jewish school.
Right.
You know, sometimes it happens, right? People that are normally on fire, sometimes that is the Nisayon. The Nisayon is they go through stages where they lose their religious passion. They feel a sense of estrangement, a sense of distance, a sense of coldness. Right? That's a Nisayon. But the Ramban says that Nisayon is only given to the people that can withstand it. Is that always the case? Well, we have to analyze by case-by-case basis. In other words, if the sense of estrangement is our own creation, then of course it falls into the first category that we can't attribute to God. But in the case where there is nothing that I did to bring it about, then it may be in that third category, which is only given to the tzaddik. But the point I want to bring out is this, is that the Nisayon is a very, very, very limited concept according to the Ramban. That means this has practical corollaries for all of us. You know, many of us, as we go through life, and you know, we face challenges, we wonder, right? You know, is it true? Is this something that I must be able to pass? And what happens when I don't pass it? And you know, the answer is not necessarily. You know, yes, there are circumstances, there are instances where the Nisayon is only sent to the tzaddik, but the garden variety of Nisyonos, the difficulties of life, that is the lot of every person, and that is to be expected. That is not something that requires an explanation. This is what the Ramban really says. That every life, by definition, is going to have difficulties, is going to have challenges. That is not something which calls for an explanation. Why? Why do I have challenges? Why is it difficult? But people were created to work hard. That's part of life. That's like breathing. That's like eating. That's like parking. These are the things that every life has. And these are inescapable. The unusual nisyonos, where a person is called upon to do something superhuman, now that's something else. But the challenges which are within the range of normal existence, every life is meant to have such challenges. That is part and parcel of living, and it doesn't call for an explanation. It's not, I must have done some sin, or there must be some theological explanation to justify this. That is just the nature of living. Adam Mon Jul, a lot of people were created. Life entails doing things that are not easy. That is what it means to be a human being. And that is to be expected. Okay, everyone, thank you for listening, and we will meet next week.